there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. Welcome to a special year-ending edition of Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera as we look back on what has been an extraordinary economic year. Markets were diving all over the place. People were losing their homes. Economies were reversing into recession. It was all bad news. But now it's getting better. We'll assess how much better and what the prospects are for 2010. We'll also hear from the head of the institution which rescued some of those recession-hit economies. Strauss-Kahn from the International Monetary Fund talks to Counting the Cost. And an update on the financial crisis in Dubai. Abu Dhabi came to the rescue. We'll look at the strings which came attached. So, 2009, what a year, huh? Started on the slide. By March, there was nothing short of a market meltdown the world over. And all the while, people were losing their jobs and their livelihoods, left, right and centre. It wasn't pretty, and it cost a lot, both in actual money stumped up by governments to stimulate their economies, but also in the trust and the faith people have in the economic models, which failed so spectacularly. But to say they failed wouldn't be telling the whole story, because in the end, 2009 has also been a year of recovery. Easiest way to show you that is to see how some of the world's major markets have fared over the course of the year. We start in the United States, the engine room on Wall Street, the Dow Jones, which was down below 7,000 points in March. But since then, a steady increase, lifted up 15.5% since the start of the year. Here's the FTSE in London, touching 3,500 at one point, now back above 5,000. For an increase of around 16.6%. And the Nikkei in Tokyo, more of a topsy-turvy year it's been in Japan, but still up around 12.5% over the year. Now, of course, markets don't tell the stories of the lost jobs and the foreclosed homes. Those have been the real stories of 2009. But they do show a certain resilience which we may not have expected 12 months ago. Well, for this year in review edition of Counting the Costs, we decided to go pretty high up in the economic world for an assessment of what happened and what might await us all in 2010. To do that, we went to the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Strauss-Kahn. He spoke to Abdurrahim Fukara in Washington, D.C.
Welcome, first of all, to the show. If we can look back over 2009, what was good, bad, or mediocre about the performance of the international economy in your view?
Well, of course, the year 2009 will remain in history books as a bad year in terms of growth. But I think that the reaction of the international community and the cooperation among all the countries make it not as worse as it could have been. So the recovery is still in place in most part of the world, and I think that when we will be looking backward, we will see that we avoided altogether something which could have been as bad as the Great Depression.
Do you feel that the impact of the financial crisis has been shared evenly and fairly between the haves and the have-nots in the world?
Well, even if the burden of the financial crisis had been shared evenly, it's not fair, because the crisis is a crisis which originated in the advanced economy, especially in the United States, and most of the emerging countries and the low-income countries are countries which were just innocent victims of the crisis. So we shouldn't expect the share to be just distributed among the different countries. We should expect that most of the effort have to be made by the advanced economies. Now, there's another way to look at this, which is the rich and the poor within each country. And here again, the problem is that, as always, a crisis relies more on the shoulders of those who are the most vulnerable. And that's why in the program that we have organized this year in different countries, asking for the help of the IMF, we had a special condition and special part of the program to deal with the problem of the most vulnerable, because when you need to rebuild an economy, to put it on tracks, it's always the most vulnerable part of the population which is the most at risk.
Do you feel that the rich countries have done what they should have done fully and completely?
I'm not over-optimistic. A lot has been done already, which is good, but we are a bit at risk of losing the political momentum. When we were in the apex of the crisis, everybody was scared, and the head of state, the head of governments, the finance minister were all willing to improve the regulation of the banking sector. The more the recovery comes, the more we're out of the crisis, even if we're not yet out of the crisis, then the less the strength, the will to change rules can be seen. And so if we wait too long, then it will be very difficult really to do what we have to do in terms of regulation and supervision of the financial sector.
There is a school of thought which says that actually the IMF is among the biggest winners out of the financial crisis, because many people had started to actually predict the end, or at least the complete marginalization of the institution. Then the financial crisis descended on us. Then you got a boost from the G20, $750 billion, then another $250 billion. Are you the biggest winners of the financial crisis?
Well, I hope the biggest winner will finally be the global economy and the fact that we will have a new growth model after the crisis, which will be a model with less risk and a more balanced way for growth. But it's true to say that in this crisis, the IMF proved its utility and the fact that it was useful for countries and its membership. You're right in saying that a few years ago, the idea of do we need or not an IMF was floating around. It's no more the case. And the G20, but not only the G20, I will say the same thing for many low-income countries. I was recently discussing with some important authorities in Africa, and they all recognizing that the IMF has changed, that it's now a new IMF which is at work, and this IMF has been certainly helpful in the crisis.
The return of the IMF, if you will, it could be argued, and you said that it's come back. It has come back not because it worked hard to come back. It worked hard just because destiny caused brought the financial crisis its way, and the financial crisis actually rescued the role of the IMF. What do you think of that?
Well, you could have imagined the financial crisis was IMF just unable to play its role. You could have also imagined that the IMF would have been destroyed before the crisis in such a way that it won't be just able to use his different tools and policies to help countries. Look at the IMF for this point as a firefighter. When you're in quiet times, you don't have any fire. You don't need the firefighters. Of course, when the fire comes back, you realize that you absolutely need the firefighter. Does that mean that it's because of the fire that the role of the firefighters comes back? No, you always need a firefighter, even when you don't have a fire, just because it's a precaution for the future. So you need a fund, like the International Monetary Fund, to be able to, as soon as the crisis begins, to be just at the forefront and begin helping countries.
What are your predictions for 2010 with regard to the strength or weakness of the performance of the international economy?
Well, we believe that the recovery will take place at the global level in 2010, but it's a sluggish recovery, and the risk, two risks in fact. One risk is that it could be recovery without jobless recovery. And as you know, the time lag between the recovery and the peak in unemployment is rather long, can be 8, 10, 12 months, depending on the countries. So it means that for a rather long time, let's say the year 2010, in most countries, at the same time, you will have growth coming back, but unemployment still rising, which is a big problem, and a political and social problem. The other risk is that we're still not out of the crisis. The crisis is still not over. And the beginning of the recovery doesn't mean that we have to forget what has been implemented to fight against the crisis. So we have to think about the exit of the strategy on the monetary side, on the fiscal side, and certainly it's very important for governments and central banks to have a plan of how to exit and how long it will take. And on the fiscal side, it certainly will take time to go back to more sustainable fiscal situation. But thinking about this, designing the exit strategy does not mean implementing them now, because now the recovery is still too weak.
And this assessment applies to both categories of countries, the rich and the poor?
Absolutely. It applies to both categories of countries, but among the rich, among the poor, there will be many differences. Some countries will exit earlier than others, but for each country there is a right time to do it, And too early, it's too early. Too late, of course, there's no reason to wait too long. And if you wait too long, you increase the debt, and that's not good. But if you exit too early to take a bigger risk, the risk is that you may go back to a new downturn in global growth, and in this case, the consequences may be huge. So the situation, in my view, is really asymmetrical. To wait a little too long is wasting resources. We have to try to avoid it. But not to wait enough for everything can be much more severe. So between the two risks, I clearly prefer to expect the recovery to be secure.
Counting the Cost returns in a moment with more of our special look back at 2009, plus an update on Dubai. The Emirates sees off its first big hurdle thanks to big brother Abu Dhabi. The dust storm, though, is far from settled.